Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, yesterday, when the Prime Minister gave his statement to the House, it was confirmed once and for all, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that government has no plan to lift this country's economy. Because what the Prime Minister told us last year was that he was going to aggressively bring the country out of recession, aggressively bring them out. And then by the end of the year, he had, I think, the country pretty much convinced that things were going pretty well, economically speaking. And then suddenly, this year, it's gone to hell in a basket. New Zealand's actually become a basket case, according to the government this year. I don't know what happened over Christmas, but everything was ticking over, and then this year, the Prime Minister's up there saying, sorry, everyone, we're actually a basket case. And if this country is a basket case, then it must be that government who we've got to blame. Because this government inherited one of the lowest government debts in the OECD when it took office. And suddenly they're now trying to convince other New Zealanders that it's a basket case. And it's such a basket case that guess what the solution is from this national government? Surprise, surprise, it's exactly the same solution every national government has had in my living history. It is to flog off the family business, sell off the state assets, same old theory that they've had that hasn't worked in the past, won't work now. And then the second thing that a national government has always done in every single situation is to give tax cuts that favour the wealthy in this country. So that's the formula. That's the formula to get us out of this situation. The government, the Prime Minister stood up yesterday and said, sorry folks, we've led you down the garden path. The country's actually a basket case. Forget what we told you last year. It is a basket case under national, and so, well, we're just going to have to sell off the family silver. We're going to have to flog off your state assets. You already own them, but we're going to flog them off, and we're going to have to do that because we've borrowed. That government has borrowed to pay for tax cuts that favour the wealthy, and that's the situation that we're in. But then the Prime Minister said something else that was interesting. He said, only about 3 or 4 things that were interesting. The next thing that he said was that we should judge his government's performance on how the vulnerable are treated in our society. On how the vulnerable are treated in our society. That's what he said. And if that's how we're going to judge his government's performance, then I'm afraid it's an epic fail. It's a fail on all counts, because the vulnerable in this society are struggling more and more as every single day of this national government goes on. And I want to talk about both ends, from the cradle to the grave actually. I want to talk about both ends of the spectrum, because if we look at how our children are faring in this country under this government, well, what we know is that one of the first areas they've taken the funding cut knife to has been early childhood education. And those funding cuts are ringing out as we speak, because they came in on the 1st of February only this year. 1st of February, many thousands of families learnt in this country that they're going to have to pay more to take their children to early childhood education. And some of those families, quite frankly, cannot afford it. They can't afford it because that government put GST up on everything that moved. They can't afford it because that government's let doctors' fees keep increasing for families. And now they're saying to those families, now you're going to have to pay more for early childhood education. And we've heard government member after government member get up and wreck their own credibility by claiming that there are no funding cuts in early childhood education. Kate Wilkinson's one who said that in her electorate alone that there was only going to be 29. Not her electorate, the electorate where she happens to live. There was only going to be $29,500 lost from her entire area in early childhood education funding cuts that her minister and her Prime Minister have told her actually don't exist. Well, I'm sorry to tell her, but if she just wanders down the road a little bit to a centre I understand is not 50 metres from where she lives, she'll actually find out that at the Swannanoa Preschool Centre alone, their budget funding cut from her government has been $100,000. $100,000 to just one centre, not 50 metres down the road from where a minister of this government lives, who was trying to tell her community, in fact, that the funding cuts, A, don't exist, and if they did, they were only going to be 29,500. So I think, those members opposite have to be very, very careful that they don't keep undermining their own personal credibility every time they step out on the street and try and convince voters and their electorates that there have been no funding cuts to early childhood education. Because one only has to go and visit any kindergarten, has to go and visit most of the ECE centres in your area to find out that those funding cuts are real. They have not been made up by the Labor Party and they have not been made up by the sector. Why is it that families are now facing increased fees of between $2 and $80 per child per week? Because that's the effect of that government's funding cuts. And the Prime Minister had the gall to go on national TV and tell the nation that on February the 1st, fees wouldn't be going up for families because of his funding cuts. That's what he told the nation. Well, I'd like him to go and speak to a few of the people in that sector. Get out and speak to some of the families. Has he spoken to Deborah Bullock, for example? Deborah Bullock's from Wanganui. She has 2 preschoolers. They attend the Jury Hills Paulson Park Kindergarten. Her fees are going up by $35 a week. In fact, they're doubling, Mr Speaker. She was initially paying $35 for her 2 children to attend preschool, to attend kindergarten, up until that government took the knife to early childhood education, the most vulnerable children in our society, and caused her fees to go up to $70 a week. That's a 100% increase in early childhood education fees for that family alone. But she is not alone, because there is around about 100,000 children and their families affected by these early childhood education funding cuts in New Zealand, right across the board. Has the Prime Minister gone and spoken with Lisa Kingsford? Because I really want to challenge him to go and speak with Lisa Kingsford, because she has a child going to the Newlands Childcare Centre in this region here in Wellington. And what she's said is that she has a fee increase of an extra $25 a week for her 4-year-old daughter, Caitlin, to attend preschool. And yet the Prime Minister's on national TV trying to convince the country that his funding cuts to early childhood education will not increase costs to families. Well, it's absolute rubbish, and that's our Prime Minister. That's our Prime Minister, getting up on TV and telling the nation something which is blatantly untrue, because it represents a broken promise. Represents a broken promise from his national government. He's embarrassed about it, and he should be, because not only have fees gone up, but his promise that 20 hours free early childhood education would stay in place, that the subsidies would stay the same and the rules would stay the same, has completely and utterly been broken. And in fact, the Minister of Education was caught out this week writing to a kindergarten specifically recommending that they actually increase a fee for 20 hours free, recommending that that's the way that they should deal with her funding cut, with that funding cut, and Tolly writing to them saying, have you thought about increasing fees for 20 hours? That's the way out of it. So you can't believe anything that that government has to say about early childhood education. You can't believe them when they say that those funding cuts have not occurred, because anyone who goes out and about their community visits early childhood education centres, and I'm starting to wonder whether the National Party whips have issued an instruction that no national MPs go out to the early childhood education sector, because I certainly haven't seen one of the many that I've visited. Well, I want to challenge that government, the Minister of Education, and particularly the Prime Minister, to talk to these families who face these increased fees, to go to the early childhood education sector and dare to front up and tell them that there has been no funding cut in their sector, because they are living it day in, day out. Those families now have to find that extra money out of their very tight budgets. just to make sure that their children can get a preschool education that is their right.
Order.
And it's an investment in their future. Labor will restore that funding cut from that unkind government.